By the time the quarterly meeting started, half the district already knew a promotion was opening before the slide deck admitted it. That was how things worked at Varello, the giant retail machine that had swallowed my adult life whole and paid me just enough to call it a career. I was 25, 7 years in, and still young enough for executives to call me promising while leaning on me like load-bearing drywall. I had started there right out of high school, stocking end caps and smiling through inventory chaos. Somewhere between fixing shrink reports nobody else could read and calming customers who treated coupon disputes like constitutional law, I worked my way into middle management. 80,000 a year sounded glamorous if you had grown up hearing adults argue over gas money. And it felt less glamorous when you realized I was doing the work of 3 people and one nervous printer. That morning, the regional director clicked to a slide with the words, Strategic Operations Lead, and the room changed shape. Managers straightened. Store leads pretended not to care. I cared very much. I had been waiting for that role so long I could have given its presentation in my sleep. Every metric they loved, I had. Labor efficiency, inventory accuracy, retention, audit compliance, margin growth. I knew the numbers so well they sat in my head like rude relatives. At the break, people clustered near the pastry tray and whispered like amateur spies. "You are the obvious pick," said Rena, one of the senior managers. "If they do not give it to you, they are unserious." That was the kindest way anyone had ever called a corporation ridiculous. I smiled and said I was keeping expectations reasonable, which was a lie, polished smooth by practice. Inside, I was already imagining a better apartment, larger retirement contributions, maybe finally hiring an attorney to review the little investment partnership agreement my cousin had been pressuring me to sign. Nothing sharpens a woman like enough money to protect. I applied that afternoon. The interviews came fast, then kept coming. One with human resources, one with regional operations, one with a panel that asked me how I handled conflict, as if conflict was not the air retail breathed. Another with a vice president named Dorian Kelm, whose cufflinks probably had their own expense account. He smiled in that practiced executive way that suggested warmth while measuring furniture for your replacement. Each round went well. Very well. By the last one, a recruiter said, off the record, that I was the most qualified candidate by a mile. There was only one other finalist, she added, and I assumed it was Joel, a manager from another district with decent numbers and the personality of dry wallpaper. I could respect that. Competition never bothered me when it was honest. Then the call came. I was sitting in my car sometime in the late afternoon, still wearing my badge, when the recruiter told me congratulations. They wanted me. I stared at the windshield and laughed once, sharp and startled. For 7 years I had opened stores, closed stores, covered disasters, rescued launch weekends. I trained managers who later took credit for my systems. Now finally, the latter had stopped pretending I was invisible. I drove home floating. An hour later, Rena called. Her voice had the careful tone people use when they are about to hand you a live snake. "Liv," she said. "Are you home?" "Yes." "Do not react before I finish." There was a late executive override. Kelm stepped in. He gave the role to his son. I thought I had misheard her. His what? His son. Owen Kelm. He was added after final review. They are announcing him tomorrow. I sat so still my pulse felt louder than traffic. I knew Owen. Everyone did. He drifted in and out of corporate like a decorative nephew at a family wedding. He had never carried a district through a staffing collapse. He had never negotiated a vendor issue, never survived a compliance audit, never had to explain to a furious woman why a return policy could not bend because her dog had eaten a blender cord. I said, very calmly, "That sounds illegal." Rena exhaled. "It sounds stupid," which is adjacent. After we hung up, I opened my laptop. People talk about heartbreak as if it makes you weak. Mine made me organized. I saved every interview email, every congratulatory note, every performance review. every message that called me promotion ready. I forwarded records to my personal account. I downloaded my compensation history, bonus summaries, and the written job posting. I printed my non-compete, then read it line by line with a yellow marker and a level of interest usually reserved for murder mysteries. Then I opened my resume and gave it the kind of attention women give exits when the building starts to smoke. And I was not going to beg a locked door. I was going to leave fingerprints on a better one. The next morning, Varello announced Owen Kelm with a glossy internal memo about leadership continuity, which was a phrase so shameless I almost admired it. They attached his headshot, a soft-faced man in an expensive tie who looked as if he had once apologized to a plant for overwatering it and considered that resilience. I printed the memo and tucked it into a folder labeled Career Development. I am a great believer in labeling evidence with cheerful language. At work, people tried not to look at me too long. Corporate offices are full of witnesses who prefer theater to testimony. They gave me sympathetic smiles, awkward nods, the occasional muttered, "This is nonsense." Nobody said any of it in writing, which told me they were not stupid. Only cowardly. I spent the day doing my actual job because competence is most satisfying when offered to people who do not deserve it. Between meetings, I built my escape plan with the same discipline I used for inventory turns. I updated my resume, but I did not stop there. Women are taught to present effort. Winners present proof. I added measurable results, not adjectives. Reduced turnover by 19%. Increased inventory accuracy to 98%. Cut loss exposure across 3 locations. Led recovery after a regional system failure. Numbers travel better than indignation. Then I called a friend from a supplier team, Mina, who had left Varello the year before and now worked in strategy for a competitor called Cormet Retail Group. "Tell me the truth," I said. "Are they hiring adults over there?" She laughed. "Yes." "What happened? Nepotism with a silk tie." She whistled. "Send your resume. Also, scrub your phone. If your company manages the device, do not job hunt on it. And check whether any agreements claim ownership of work product from your personal files if created on company equipment." That was why I liked Mina. She treated betrayal like a process problem. I checked everything. My laptop was mine. My phone was mine. My files were mine. My references were moved offline. I stopped using company Wi-Fi for anything but company work. I removed personal passwords from shared browsers and saved screenshots of my achievements to a private drive. I was not paranoid. I was literate in corporate behavior. By sometime in the early evening, I had applications out to 4 competitors: Cormet, Loxby Market Systems, Sable House Retail, and Juniper Row Holdings, which sounded like a home decor catalog but paid like private equity. Interviews started within days. That was when the insult became comedy. At Varello, I had needed 4 rounds, multiple executive reviews, and enough performance documentation to qualify for a museum archive. At the competitors, I had thoughtful conversations with people who seemed startled by my actual knowledge. One recruiter paused halfway through a call and said, "You built that labor model yourself?" "Yes." "And they kept you at middle management. Apparently, they were saving me for decorative disappointment." She snorted so hard I nearly liked her on the spot. With each interview, my anger refined itself. It stopped being emotional fog and became something better. Clarity. I knew exactly what I would not tolerate again. Vague bonus language, unclear promotion criteria, mandatory arbitration buried in onboarding paperwork, non-solicitation clauses broad enough to criminalize lunch. Companies love calling women difficult when we read before signing. I call that survival with punctuation. At Varello, Owen strutted through meetings using phrases I had heard in my interviews. He repeated my ideas with the confidence of a man who had never watched rent clear his account with $10 left over. Once, in front of 3 directors, he praised my operational framework as a fresh direction for the department. "Fresh," I said, "because I handed you that deck last quarter." A silence fell so fast it should have had legal representation. He smiled the way weak men do when they think charm can replace substance. Right, well, good ideas rise. Yes, I said. Some are carried. Rena coughed into her notebook to hide a laugh. By the end of that week, I had 3 second-round interviews and a growing sense that Varello had not merely insulted me, they had underpriced me. That is a dangerous thing to do to a woman who knows how to read an offer letter. I was not going to storm out with a dramatic speech and a cardboard box. I was going to do something much more unsettling. I was going to leave correctly. The first offer came from Loxby Market Systems sometime in the late morning, while I was pretending Owen had not just asked me to walk him through vendor dispute procedures I had written. The base salary was $190,000, with a signing bonus, equity units, and a title 2 levels above my current role. I stared at the number until it stopped looking like a typo and started looking like 7 years of underpayment wearing a silk robe. The second offer arrived from Juniper Row the next day. $210,000, broader authority, better benefits, and reimbursement for legal review of employment documents. I nearly stood up and applauded in my kitchen. The third came from Cormet. $240,000 annual bonus target, relocation optional, and direct oversight of a regional transformation team. Same level of work I had already been doing, just with honest nouns attached to it. 3 times my pay. Not because I had transformed overnight into a rare and mystical executive swan, because Varello had trained me to carry premium value while paying me like a discounted bulk item. I did not celebrate immediately. Excitement makes people careless, and I had plans. I sent each offer to an employment attorney named Dana Voss, recommended by Mina. Dana billed by the hour and wrote emails like a woman who had personally defeated weather. She reviewed restrictive covenants, bonus language, severance provisions, and intellectual property clauses. You are clear to move, she told me, but do not take proprietary documents, client lists, or internal strategy materials. Take your memory, your public accomplishments, and your dignity. Those are yours. It was strange how soothing that was. She also advised me to preserve a timeline of the promotion process, including the initial notice that I had been selected. Not because I needed to sue that week, but because records age badly in other people's hands. If I later needed leverage over withheld compensation, retaliation, or a false narrative, contemporaneous documentation would matter. So I built a file that looked boring and could ruin a liar's month. Emails, dates, interview notes, performance reviews, compensation statements, the congratulatory call log, the internal memo naming Owen, my handwritten notes from meetings where executives praised my readiness. None of it stolen, all of it mine to keep. At work, Owen had started asking for more help. He wanted to understand freight allocation. He wanted a summary of district variance patterns. He wanted insight into which managers could be counted on during rollout stress. I gave him nothing confidential beyond what my job required, and nothing strategic that would let him wear my brain like a borrowed blazer. I was polite, precise, and gloriously unhelpful. One afternoon he leaned against my office door and said, "I know this transition has probably been weird for you." Probably, I said, is doing acrobatics in that sentence. He laughed, uncertain. You are valuable here, Liv. Valuable is what companies say when they want premium work at clearance rates. His ears pinked. I think you are taking this personally. A promotion handed to the vice president's son instead of the documented top candidate? I said. What a mystery. How anyone might form a personal impression. He left after that. Meanwhile, I negotiated. Juniper raised their base. Cormet improved the equity. Loxby added a guaranteed first-year bonus. I did not bluff. I simply allowed market reality to introduce itself. Women are often told not to be too aggressive, usually by people who benefit from our hesitation. I have found that civility and firmness make an excellent duet. In the end, I chose Cormet. The team was sharp, the structure was real, and my future boss asked better questions than any Varello executive ever had. She wanted to know how I made decisions under incomplete information, how I built teams, how I protected margins without burning staff. She sounded like someone who understood that retail runs on people long before it runs on branding. Then came the delicious part. I scheduled my resignation for the same week Owen was set to present his first regional strategy update, which, inconveniently for him, rested on operational knowledge living almost entirely in my head. Not proprietary knowledge, not stolen systems. Just lived expertise, relationship context, and the practical order of things. In the unglamorous architecture that keeps large companies from tripping over their own shoes. I wrote my resignation letter with perfect restraint. No bitterness, no plea. No mention of fathers, sons, or ethics dragged behind luxury loafers. I simply thanked them for the opportunity, stated my final date, and declined the exit interview unless counsel was present. People think revenge is loud. Mine was documented, lawful, and about to walk out wearing heels. I handed in my resignation sometime in the early morning, before office gossip had properly warmed up. My direct supervisor, Celia, read the letter once, then again, like the words might rearrange themselves into something less expensive. "You are leaving," she said. "I am." "For where?" "Cormet." Her face tightened with the kind of professional grief reserved for budget cuts and executive scandals. "They offered you the operations director role, did they not? They offered me respect with a salary attached." Celia set the paper down very carefully. "Are you open to a counter?" "No. You have not heard the number. That is because the number is not the point." For one flicker of a second, I thought she might say something brave. Instead, she folded her hands and became management again. "We would like you to help with transition planning. I will document my current responsibilities and provide a standard handoff within my notice period," I said. "Beyond that, I am not available for expanded training without a consulting agreement." Her eyebrows lifted. "Consulting. Yes. And it is amazing how much knowledge costs once it is no longer available at employee rates." By lunchtime, half the building knew I was leaving. By sometime in the late afternoon, executives were suddenly very interested in my calendar. Dorian Kelm requested a meeting. I accepted, because I enjoy clear views of panic. His office looked like a place where bad decisions received natural light. He invited me to sit, folded his manicured hands, and offered the sort of smile men use when they think they are about to calm a horse. "Liv, we value your contributions enormously." I nearly asked whether he had learned that phrase in nepotism school. "Thank you," I said. "I understand you are making a move based on compensation concerns. I am making a move based on governance concerns that happen to include compensation." His smile thinned. "I would caution against framing internal staffing decisions in emotional terms. Nothing cools a room like a woman refusing to be patronized on schedule." "I am framing them in factual terms," I said. "I was informed I had been selected. The role was then redirected to your son after the process concluded. I have retained records. I am not discussing emotion. I am discussing sequence." He blinked once. Slow. Calculating. That process was within executive discretion. "Maybe," I said. "Retaliation and misrepresentation are less charming under scrutiny." I had not threatened a lawsuit. I had done something more effective. I had reminded him that paper exists. He shifted to the practical. "What would it take to keep you?" "An alternate universe," I said. He did not laugh. Then I stood, thanked him for his time, and left him alone with the sound of his own blood pressure. My final week was a master class in quiet leverage. Requests poured in. "Can you explain the shrink model? Can you walk Owen through district escalation? Can you summarize the staffing logic for the spring reset?" I answered what I reasonably owed, documented what was mine to document, and refused to become the unpaid scaffolding for my own replacement. Rena stopped by my office the day before I left and closed the door. "You know what the funniest part is?" she said. "There are many contenders. Your resignation triggered 2 more departures. 1 manager, 1 analyst." Apparently, your exit clarified things for people. I leaned back and smiled. Nothing starts an audit of self-respect like watching one woman cash out properly. That night, I reviewed my financial plan. Emergency fund topped up. Retirement rollover instructions ready. New salary allocation drafted before the first deposit even hit. More to tax-advantaged accounts. More to a brokerage I controlled alone. A bigger legal reserve. Women are often warned not to be mercenary, usually by people who are billing us. On my last day, Owen appeared at my door with that uncertain smile again. "I really wish this had gone differently," he said. "It did," I replied. "Just not for you." I handed over my badge, my keys, and exactly 0 pieces of myself that had not already been overpaid by the market. Then I walked out of Varello lighter, richer, and far more amused than any heartbroken employee had a right to be. Cormett did not change my life with inspirational speeches. It changed my life with payroll, authority, Warren, and the radical idea that my judgment had market value. My new office was smaller than Dorian Kelm would have considered dignified, which made it perfect. I did not need a cathedral. I needed decision rights. Within weeks, I was leading a regional overhaul that touched labor planning, vendor compliance, and loss prevention. The work was difficult, political, and very familiar. The difference was that when I solved a problem, nobody acted shocked that I had a brain. Money changed things too, though not in the silly way people imagine. I did not run out and buy a fragile white sofa or a handbag with hardware visible from space. I paid down the last of my student debt from night classes. I increased my retirement contributions. I met with an estate planning attorney and drafted healthcare and financial powers of attorney, and because adulthood is less glamorous than television and more useful. I updated beneficiaries, froze my credit, expanded my umbrella insurance, and opened a trust account for future real estate plans. Security is not pessimism, it is choreography. Then Varello called. It happened sometime in the early evening, about 3 months after I left. Celia wanted to know whether I would consider a short-term consulting arrangement. Operational drift had worsened. A rollout was behind. Turnover had climbed. Owen, apparently, was discovering that inherited titles do not come with downloadable competence. I let her finish. "My consulting rate," I said, "is $800 per hour, paid in advance, with a minimum weekly retainer and a scope limited to advisory review. No direct management, no exclusivity, no ownership transfer of pre-existing methods." Silence. "That is a very high rate," she said. "It is lower than the cost of preventable failure." They did not hire me, which was wise. I would have charged them with a smile sharp enough to open packaging. A week later, Rena sent me an update from someone still inside. Owen had stumbled through a regional presentation and blamed execution gaps on legacy process confusion, which is executive language for I was handed a machine and still put soup in the printer. Not long after that, Dorian was quietly moved out of oversight for staffing approvals. No dramatic scandal, no perp walk, just the corporate version of being placed in decorative exile. That was the most satisfying ending of all. Not because I ruined anyone. I did not have to. People like that build their own trapdoors. I simply declined to stand underneath. Rena and I met for dinner sometime that week. She lifted her glass and said, "To your villain era." I shook my head. "No, to invoice era." She laughed so hard she scared the waiter. On the ride home, I thought about the girl I had been at 18, clocking in before sunrise, thinking loyalty was a ladder and hard work was always visible from the top. She was not foolish. She was simply underinformed. That is a curable condition if a woman is willing to learn where power hides. It hides in contracts, in records, in who controls the account, in whether your name is on the deed, in whether you read the offer letter when everyone else is celebrating, in whether you save the email before somebody gets creative with history. I did not win because a good person rescued me. I won because I understood that being underestimated is only dangerous if you agree with it. Varello gave the job to a vice president's son. The market gave me 3 better answers. I took the highest one, locked the door behind me, and called it what it was. Not luck, interest.